Let's fucking go!
Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Taylor, and you are listening to the Marvel Card Collectors Podcast, your weekly digest of hobby goodness. I won't labour an introduction this week. For once, this guest doesn't need one. So bang, bang, and LFG, as I'm going to enjoy this sit down with Eugene Hu. Welcome back to the podcast, sir.
Thanks for having me, as always.
Hey. Now, I will say before we dig in, this is still undecided, but those on YouTube may not see your beautiful face this episode. We'll see how we go. So if you're watching on YouTube and there's just a little animated picture over Eugene's half of the screen, then that's why. So people know who you are. If they don't, they can go back and listen to the last time you're on the podcast. I can't remember what episode number it was, but it was in a former life. But it was about 13 months ago. So how's the last 13 months been since you were last on?
In my opinion, it's been a roller coaster. The Nationals at Atlantic City in 2022 was an awesome moment for me and the hobby in general. A lot of positive sentiment coming out of that. Felt really good about where the hobby was headed towards at that time. Since then, for Marvel, what's been the big sets? Not much besides Fleer Ultra Avengers, right? And then, as of late, Marvel Masterpieces.
I mean, there's been a lot, but it's the definition of big, I guess.
I guess on their scale of like what they consider top of the line and high end. Standout sets. I mean, there's entry level sets. There's always like to me, Marvel Annual is an amazing set, for example. But that's on like the lower end of the spectrum in terms of price point.
Yeah.
And it's meant to allow more collectors into the hobby, and it's a more accessible price point. But then Fleer Ultra and Avengers and Marvel Masterpieces are the two hype sets since then, right? And, wow, has it been a circus?
Yeah, just a touch. I mean, of course, we had Allure and Beginnings, but everything was so close together. I kind of feel like they've almost disappeared off everyone's radar.
Beginnings is such a great set, and it just feels like it never had its moment to shine. It could never breathe, right?
Yeah,
because it was jammed between Fleer Ultra Avengers on EPAC and then Marvel Masterpieces. So it's like, oh, big spend, Beginnings. Okay, people who are going to spend big are like, I can pause on this, and we just went into the ecosystem now that is Marvel Masterpieces 2022.
Yeah, of course. 2022. Even
then Allure also never really got a chance to shine, right? I think Allure will get more recognition after it gets on EPAC.
Yeah.
But just not enough people have been cracking open that stuff. They're beautiful cards.
Yeah, they are nice. I've got some. I did have some here actually. In fact, no, I gave most of the box I got. I just gifted them to a fella. They're in the mail as we speak. So outside of the autos and probably the Black Rainbow, the rest of it, I'm kind of like, but I tell you what else didn't get a chance to shine. I mean, it's still kind of coming out. Is What If? I don't know if you've touched any of that, but it's bloody gorgeous.
There are definitely some cards that I am targeting in that set.
Yeah.
More on the high end side, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think UD crushed it with that set in terms of quality.
Yeah.
They've been reaching out for feedback, and I've been giving them more and more thoughts. And What If has checked all the boxes for me. I think the one, I don't know if you would call it a flaw, but one thing that would like prevent it from mass appeal is that show wasn't for everyone.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing. I think you have to be an MCU fanatic, but at the same time be open to animation, and then understand Marvel lore, right? Because them creating those scenarios, it's fun as hell, and at the same time, it's very niche.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm not someone who's ever really gone into animated Marvel, with the
Huh.
possible exception of Spider-Man and Iceman, Spider-Man and Firestar show back in the 80s. Um, but I've watched the first episode, maybe the first two episodes of it, but I always used to get the What If comics. So the concept for me, I'm 100% take my money now on the concept. Um,
Mm,
and what I love is the fact that while it's an MCU set, they've leaned into Marvel card lore to make
mhm.
it work. So the Marvel Universe 1990 crossover, I think, is absolutely amazing. I love the fact that they've brought in the medallions.
Yep.
Um, I love the fact they brought in Black Diamond, although I'm probably going to regret that. Well, my wallet is sooner or later. The acetate are beautiful and clean. 9 times 9, 81 card set right there. And the Battle Spectrum. I can't. Oh, yes, I do have one here. Um, which are actually going to go in my binder with my Masterpieces 2022.
Yeah, I
Because,
mean, for me, I love that they basically did a what if set,
hmm,
not just on the show, but like what if these cards were on different inserts?
yeah, yeah.
And honestly, you know, I thought it was better thought and planned out than Fleet Ultra Avengers. You might even argue that in terms of set design, it probably was more thought out than Marvel Masterpieces.
Hmm,
Um,
hmm,
we can talk about that later. But you know,
hmm.
for example, I hated the fact that they brought Preserved Amber for Marvel Masterpieces.
Yeah.
That's almost like a what if insert.
Almost is, isn't it? It's bizarre. They came out so close together, one influenced the other.
Something about what if people don't even realize high gloss, which is the out of 10 parallel in hockey, is one of the most coveted parallels in hockey.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
they brought it to what if,
Yeah,
and it's kind of just like sliding under the radar.
yeah.
And in reality, it's like a beautiful, stunning card.
Is that like the one per pack one?
No, it's an out of 10
Ah,
that
okay.
they do for the one that looks like the hockey parallel with the little photo.
Yeah. So this is the regular hockey
Yep. And
parallel.
then there's an
Yeah.
out of 10 version of that, and that's like the high gloss.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
These are. I mean, there's a couple of characters I might go. I mean, the Watcher. I mean, whatever set you're going to get the Watcher in. I mean,
So they took that design from Upper Deck Series 1 and Series 2.
yeah.
There's basically their annual set for their hockey.
Mm,
And I love that design. That specific year's design is what they used.
yeah.
And it's beautiful. I love the picture in picture.
Yeah.
And then in hockey, the out of 10 parallel for that has always been coveted.
Okay. Well, I didn't get one of those in my box, but yeah, I got a lot of cool stuff, and I'm trading it well, so that's cool. So let's talk about. So we had last week we had Amanda on, and there's connective tissue here. So for those who didn't pick up from last week's show, you went to the national in it was in Chicago this year. Is that right?
Yep. It was
Yep.
my third national. Yep.
Okay. And Amanda went as well. I think that was her second. I want to say. I think
She
she went to the Atlantic
she's been to
City.
three, but this she
Ah.
went this one back to back. She went
Okay.
one a long time ago. I was listening to your podcast earlier this week,
Oh,
uh,
okay.
and yeah, I think that's what she said.
I I don't even remember, and I had the conversation with her. So it was very early when I recorded. Um, it wasn't even dark. It wasn't even light actually when we sat down to record that. Um, so and this is a back-to-back one. So last year, people can go back and listen to this. You went to the national and you just took a lot of your high-end stuff. Um, so basically, let me rewind slightly. Sorry, I muffed up that connectivity. So you did a panel this year at the National, an upper deck panel. And I think the kind of hook was bangers and base cards because Amanda's, all about the base cards, the exclusive, the junk wax, as she refers to it, the 90s stuff as well. Whereas your collection is very high end, very unique, important pieces. Um, and you took those to display last year. So this year, did you do the same again? Was that
So to walk you through it in 2022, I brought my Spider-Man collection overall as a whole, um,
gotcha?
mainly from the high end range. But if you remember in 2022, that was like right after all of this like PMG and jambalaya sports hype.
Hmm.
whatever you want to call it, pump and dump misinformation, but it was hype.
Yeah.
There's general excitement around those cards, but it sort of felt like the hobby was transforming to, oh, Marvel cards is just PMGs, but
Yeah.
way more than that. And at that time, no one was talking about Marvel masterpieces. So um, I showed the PMGs and the sports cards and sketches and other high end, but I also showed the full range of my Marvel masterpieces Spider-Man collection, which should be the most completionist collection for Spider-Man and for modern Marvel masterpieces.
Hmm.
And I think that got a lot of excitement. A lot of people came by. I was like, "Whoa! I didn't know these cards existed.
Yeah.
This is so cool!" Like, so how much is something like this worth? And to me, it's priceless.
Mm.
So fast forward a year later, Upper Deck reached out and wanted to showcase EPAC exclusive cards. Um, Due to a COMC mishap, uh, they weren't able to ship my cards in time.
Ah,
Even though I paid for like overnight shipping, it was a misunderstanding, but like that wasn't shipped in time. So once again, I brought the Marvel Masterpieces Spider-Man collection. I did that for Thursday and Friday, the first 2 days, and then Saturday and Sunday I displayed EPAC achievements.
oh,
So basically, like 100x combines, like the rainbow web foils.
yeah.
In my opinion, the most popular slash most important characters in Spider-Man Metal, so it kind of told a story together.
Mm.
I showed Future Watch achievements, which are
Oh,
super cool, and I don't want to like disregard the sports and Marvel crossover, but Future Watch is huge in sports, so I showed that
yeah.
as well. But it was just more about once again showing that Marvel Cars has range.
Mm.
And then
Yeah.
Amanda showed her EPAC achievements next to me, and she kept on joking like, "Oh yeah, you are showing all like the bangers, and I'm just showing bass." And then while we were on the panel, she was like, "Oh, we're basically bass and bangers," and I was like, "That's pretty cool,"
Yeah.
because there's no wrong way to collect.
No.
Uh, the way Amanda collects is, she collects base cards, but she likes to grade them.
Yeah.
She likes to find, gem mint or mint copies of a mass produced card, which
Yeah.
actually it produces its own level of rarity, right?
Hmm.
And then for me, the way I collect is I like to collect in the high end spectrum in terms of rarity. I like to find cards that are out of 99 or less, or considered SSP,
Yeah.
super print. Um, so it was a lot of fun showing that the balance between us two, and I think the crowd and people who tuned into the live stream definitely enjoyed the honest conversation.
Mm. Yeah. No, I did. It was up on YouTube for a short while. Um, but I cheekily downloaded it. But I'm not going to release it because I realized it was on your Instagram and it wasn't meant to stay there. But yeah, I very much enjoyed that. It's about half an hour long, if I remember correctly. Um, so what would you say? Just actually no, just rewind slightly. On the panel, how many? It's difficult to get a sense of it because obviously the phone or the camera was facing you two on the stage with I think it was Dylan from Upper Deck.
Mhm.
How many people were in the kind of audience for that,
Oh wow. Off the
roughly?
top of my head, it was a decent amount. I would say it was about 30 plus people.
Oh, cool. Okay.
It was definitely a nice turnout, and there were people from MCCW there. Um, People who I met at the convention, like during Thursday or Friday, and then I was like, "Hey, I'll be speaking later," and they actually came by.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Pancake Analytics was there, who I met during that,
Oh,
and I couldn't say anything better about that guy. He was awesome,
yeah.
and it was fun. It was great to be able to connect with people about Marvel cards and genuinely share my passion and interests.
Mm, mm. Um, what would you say? Because I remember, I'm not going to go over it. People can go back and listen to it. But I remember you describing the reaction to what you showed at National 2022. And obviously, the immediate hook and gravity was towards the cards that people knew, especially from the sports side. And there was a bit of an educational curve with the masterpieces kind of lens. How was 2023? What kind of responses were you getting? And obviously, I know that you showed a kind of a different set Thursday, Friday, and then I'm guessing your ComSeer delivery arrived. Is that what happened? Is
Yeah,
that why you
yeah.
swapped it out? Right. So it did arrive eventually. So what was the difference in kind of reactions like a year
So
on?
so I had a booth to sell this time.
Okay.
Uh, so I had a table that I shared with my buddy, par for the course cards, who's I call him my big brother in cards, big brother in life, and we shared a table, and I showed one showcase of sports cards, and I showed one showcase of Marvel cards.
Okay.
Last year, I didn't sell anything until the last day, and I only carved out like a small little section for sale, just because so many people were coming by and asking, and a lot of people were asking for their kids. And last year, I sold a ton of MCU stuff. I
Mm.
sold a ton of Black Diamond while I was at the National. This year, I sold almost exclusively sketches.
Oh,
Like
interesting.
it's super interesting. So this year I brought a nice mix of, you know, uh, from low end to high end, but I had out Black Diamond. I had out like one of one stuff. I had printing plates. I had sketches, et cetera, et cetera. And the most in demand and it was easily my sketches.
That's interesting.
So
That is really
it
interesting.
was
Yeah.
really cool to see how like that demographic has shifted.
Yeah.
Um, and it was really interesting to me that it wasn't just the cheap stuff that was going. Like people were coming and buying high end stuff, and I was like, oh, the hobby is changing. Um, it's cool to see this. I'm not a data guy like Pancake, no, at least not to his extent,
Yeah.
but it was cool to absorb that and see how the demographic has shifted. And no one asked me for precious metal gems. Nobody asked me for Marvel masterpieces at my table, and I think that has to do with being at a national sports convention.
Yeah.
But it seems like there has a change in sentiment towards sketch cards. There's appreciation there.
Wow. Okay. Of all the things that I thought you were going to say, that was the least.
Yep.
That was probably the last on my list. I wonder where that's come from then. That's interesting because there've been less in the products, certainly in the last year, and we've not been short of products, but there've definitely been less out there.
So
Um,
I think of it this way: like when people buy sketches, they buy it online. It's you're not. It's not possible to truly appreciate the full work
no.
because you don't get to see like the texture. You don't get to see like the actual color. Like who knows like
Mm,
what kind of lighting was used for the photos. And you also don't. You also it's hard to showcase all your sketches for sale, right? Meanwhile, at a show, you can have it all laid out. You can have that interaction. People can flip through your pile. I
yeah.
did a stack like this, but showcased, and people were just going through it. I'll show them one by one, and like, oh, I want this one. I want this one. And there's also less price resistance at a show
Mm,
um, because there's people who are thrift shopping, value shopping, but then there's also people who are like looking to spend, looking to find. I want to walk away from the show with something.
yeah.
And it's almost like a souvenir. Like I think I might have talked about it on last year's podcast, but one of my goals every year, which has unfortunately not been achieved this year, is to walk away from the show with one Michael Jordan PSA 10 card. Like that's
Right.
one of the things I collect,
Yeah.
and that market has just gotten so out of control that I couldn't even find one that I liked at an affordable price.
Mm,
Um, but I'm sure other people feel the same way, right? Like, hey, I want to walk out of this show with something for my PC.
yeah. Absolutely.
And sketches have been very fluid for people. Like, hey, I love this art because art is subjective. Like
Yeah.
that I might find priceless, you might find to be $40,
Mm, yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. That's as the 30 plus sketches on my eBay account that aren't moving anywhere would show that's definitely the case. Um, so when you when you were getting into your high end stuff, I'm just going to segue slightly. What kind of, and I think we touched on this last year, but it's relevant. What kind of learning curve did you go through that told you that this was high end, and how important was that process to you? because
Mm,
I want to get into talking about like education of people as to what the hobby is, because there is that crossover. There's the Future Watch, there is the hockey style parallels, and that there is that crossover and connective tissue. Um, but it seems to me that those two worlds are starting to become familiar with each other now, from what you're saying. So, if you're
yeah.
coming in from the sports side or from no side whatsoever, and you want to get into the hobby, what kind of education process did you go through, and what would you think would be relevant for people who are coming in now?
So something I think I talked about on the podcast last year, and I talked about it at the upper deck panel. Like again, I don't speak too much publicly, especially about cards.
Mm,
Um, but one thing that I think I'm consistent on, and I constantly echo is curation.
yeah,
Um, and that applies to anything I buy, right? I I think I've said this, but I come from nothing. My family comes from
mm,
nothing. They're blue collar immigrants.
that's right.
Um, I went to public school my whole life, even university. Um, I remember my first job. My first internship. I had like a service department with a maid service, and I was like, I might never live this good ever again. That's how I thought, Like, but I don't take things for granted.
Yeah, of
And
course.
because of that, I'm very careful with how I use my disposable income. So for me, absorbing information and making as few reckless mistakes as possible is crucial in my life.
Mm,
Otherwise, for me, at some point, I just have to stop collecting. Um, so for me, when it comes to curating high end, it's absorbing information and knowing what you want to collect, what you think is important, and what you want to exhibit. And when I say exhibit, it's like, what do you want to show the world? Like, what do you
yeah.
want people to see of your collection? What do you want them to think of it? People don't know, and I think I said this before. Like, I probably have one of the biggest precious metal gems collections in the world, at least in terms of key cards.
Mm,
Um, and not once did I go out and post or comment and say, hey, these cars are incredibly important, incredibly valuable, and that like you should buy it now. It's a good investment, right? Because that's not what high-end collecting actually is. Um, what high-end collecting is finding cars that you deem important and showing it to the world and letting them see your taste, and whether they agree or not, see if there's traction.
mm,
I think one of the most recent Instagram accounts is this high-end sports collector called Kimmy Yang,
okay.
Kimmy and G. Um, and that person may possibly have the most high-end Jordan collector, most high-end basketball exquisite collection in the world, and it was never revealed until 2023. Like
Oh wow.
people didn't know this account existed on Instagram. Um, and just by the sheer importance of these cards, like people started freaking out and sharing posts and following, and that account has become an aspiration for many sports collectors. For Marvel, that I said this before, the information is so fragmented, right?
Yeah.
Like a whole bunch of us collected 90s cards, and you had people saying, oh, 1990 MC, what is it, Marvel Universe cards is like
Mm,
the rookie cards from Marvel. It's absolutely not. One, I hate the term rookie cards for Marvel because none of these characters were drafted by a team. None of these characters, were signed to a team. Uh, but there's first appearance cards, right? And like the first Marvel cards are 1966 tops, and
mm,
that almost is like glazed over, and people don't talk about it.
mm,
Um, and then what was my point here? So this is about the misinformation there, but also in the 90s, you have genuinely rare and coveted cards.
mm.
You have like the sketch graphs, you have 1995 Mirages. A lot of new collectors don't know, but 1996 Marvel Masterpieces is not a high print run. That's a really difficult set to piece together, and
Yeah.
there's why to this day a master set is going to probably run you minimum $2,500.
Yeah.
Um, there's Stan Lee sketches. There's such cool stuff in the '90s, and people don't even know about it. Now, fast forward, and I'm going to skip over the Rittenhouse and 2008 Marvel Masterpieces. It was in 2007, but the reason why I'm
Both.
skipping over it is because I'm not an expert in it.
Mm,
Uh, I don't know much about it. And oh, that's another misconception. I've only been in the hobby for 4 or 5 years. But
well, in the
people
Marvel side, you mean?
on the Marvel side, yes,
Yeah, because I know you were in sports before, weren't you? Yeah.
I've been collecting cards since I was, it's 31 years now,
Wow.
in different capacities.
Yeah.
But for Marvel, like, and taking Marvel seriously and spend in terms of expenditure, it's been 4 or 5 years.
Mm,
And I remember when I came into this hobby, uh, more recently, I knew nothing in the sense of like, oh, what sets are out there? What do people like? Um, but I never, it never really mattered to me what people like, because at the end of the day, it's my money and what I
yeah.
want to spend it on.
Yeah.
Um, and like I've said, I'm just a boy from Queens, who loves Spider-Man. So I collect Spider-Man cards. And it just so happened at that time on EPAC, Fear Ultra Spider-Man was still a thing and widely accessible. And,
And this was
as
pre-COVID.
this is pre-COVID,
Mm,
and people just weren't collecting at the volume that they are now, and spending what they are now. So very blessed, right place, right time. Uh, but I remember seeing uh, Marvel Masterpieces cards, and like people knew that I was like a high end Fleet Ultra Spider Man collector, and they're like, "Why don't you collect Marvel Masterpieces?"
yeah.
I'm like, "Well, I collected as a kid. I like the cards as a kid. What's so special about the current sets?" And wow, finding out that you know all the base cards are numbered,
Mm,
all of it is original art again, um, and I'm like, whoa, this is the flagship product of Marvel. How come people don't know about it? And people don't know this because I rarely get a chance to talk about it. But the first Marvel Masterpieces card I bought was Simone Bianchi, if I pronounce the name correctly,
yeah.
um, Magneto Gold Signature.
Oh,
Uh,
nice.
wasn't an expensive card.
Oh,
I paid like $2 for it on COMC. But I absolutely adore that Magneto art, that specific card. And I was like,
mm,
wow, this card is stunning. Um, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna dive into this a little more. And then I started falling in love with the Spider-Man and Wolverine from that set. So I started buying up Wolverine, or the orange and the purples, the out of 99, out of 199, just
yeah.
because couldn't afford I couldn't afford a tier 4 even back then. And I because I was so heavy into Future Spider-Man, like most of my disposable income was going there. How do I shift that money into
Mm,
a set? And over time, obviously right place, right time. Got the Marvel Masterpieces 2018 Red Spectrum of Spider-Man, and that really vaulted me into that Marvel Masterpiece collecting world ecosystem and wanting to learn more about it. I bought that card, and at that time, I don't need to hide this because it was on eBay, but I think I paid somewhere between 3,500 to 4,000. And I remember it's the post is still up in on the Facebook group in MCCW, and there were people saying that I overpaid. And there were people. It was a comment saying, this happens all the time. People overpay and end up selling it for less later. Uh, Sorry, that card will probably live with me, for a very long time.
mm, mm,
It's almost crucial to my collection, right? It's
yeah.
a cornerstone of my collection. And once I obtained that card and I received it in person, I was like, this is an incredible card in terms of aesthetics, in terms of importance, and how do I collect more of it? So then I started learning more about how the set came to be. So I started learning about 2016
Yeah.
and Tedesco, who, in my opinion, might be one of the most important people to exist in the Marvel hobby,
Yeah.
because Marvel Masterpieces 1992 um, took Marvel card collecting into a different world.
Yeah.
And based on all accounts of the 1990s, based on all accounts of the 2016 Marvel Masterpieces collectors, they a lot of people came back just to collect that set. I wasn't around. I wasn't around in 2016. I wasn't around in 2018. So I didn't get to see the frenzy that existed back then, but I've only heard, personal recaps from other collectors that collected that set. And I can see that passion and fervor. The same way I see it for every Marvel Masterpieces set since.
Yeah.
You saw with Simone, Dave Palumbo had all of these Magic the Gathering collectors come into the space. Dan Dos Santos clearly has a grip on the hobby right now, and it's beautiful to see.
Mm.
It's beautiful to see, and I wish that could be translated to the general public for mass adoption
Yeah.
because it's not translated well. I think that was one of my takeaways from the National. The enthusiasm for Marvel was less this year than 2022.
Interesting.
And the people were coming like, "Oh, you're still showing Marvel cards? Didn't those cards die?" Like people were describing the hobby in that way. I'm like, what part of it died? They're like, oh yeah, all these people lost money on precious metal gems, and they feel terribly about it. I'm like, well, they should have probably did some research. They
Hmm.
probably should have understood speculating bubbles in any alternative assets, whether it's cards, crypto, watches, sneakers, whatever it is. There bubbles happen, unfortunately. Bad players and manipulation happens, unfortunately. Uh, but if you look at precious metal gems today compared to where they were 5 years ago, that floor is still significantly higher.
Oh yeah, much.
Multiples higher.
Mm.
So nothing died. I would just say there was a regression or corrected the means.
Mm. Yeah.
I know that was a long rant, but we're talking about high end cards and how I go about collecting them. Um, for me, I'm a character collector, but collecting Spider-Man, as you can imagine, is not affordable.
Yeah. It's
Pull
like
every Yeah,
it's like doing the hobby on insane mode on a video game, isn't it?
yeah. I'm not a whale. Some people may think so, but at the end of the day, I don't own my apartment. I have a wife that I love and would like to take care of. I have other aspirations outside of cards, and there's only so much I can put in terms of expenditure towards cards.
Mm. Mm.
I'm very, very blessed, and in the sense that I was early, and I don't
Yeah.
think people coming into the hobby now, I don't think it's fair to say that they're early. They may be early, but they might be like 30 years early, right?
Yeah.
Uh, Meanwhile, when I came into the hobby, I was 2, 3 years early. There's a big difference.
Yeah.
Like for me to see that exponential growth in the value of my collection, that happened in a very short amount of time. For people who coming in today and spending $800 a box buying singles at these prices today,
Mm.
that to see the same return in terms of percentage might be a very, very long time
Yeah.
away.
Well, no, it's going to be plateau for a bit
Right, and this
because
is
there's a
and
lot of product out as well. Masterpieces aside, there's a lot out there.
yeah, and it comes into like when I came into the hobby, the amount of collectors boomed.
Mm.
Do we see that boom now and within the next 5 years? I know like Upper Decks and Fanatics probably sure hope so,
Yeah.
but in reality, it's going to be ticks, right?
Yeah.
Aiming for 5, 10, 20% growth year on year. I'm sure. I'm sure these brands would be ecstatic with 20% growth year on year, but it's
Of
just
course.
not feasible, or not sustainable. Sorry, feasible is it's definitely possible, but at some point, it's going to be like, okay, how does the hobby move in lockstep?
Mm.
So going again, I was very lucky, um, and I was able to collect characters outside of Spider-Man as well. I collect other top characters. I collect other sketch cards from people who are considered top artists today. Like I was buying Ash Gonzalez sketches like week one of Marvel Masterpiece 2020 because I recognized the art and I was like, these sketches are going to be huge. And lo and
Mm.
behold,
Mm. Mm.
yeah, his market boom in multiples. Um, So I'm very lucky in the sense that I can trade away extras to keep adding to my collection.
Yeah. Well, you're in a position where you've got enough collateral that can feed into back into the hobby.
Yeah. But for people who are joining the hobby today, I think that's very difficult.
Mm.
So, and I'm not saying that that should discourage them because they should absolutely enjoy the hobby, but I think they do have to be way more selective. I know I'm being very very selective now because like you buy you know three four high end cards that might be your paycheck for the month,
Yeah.
right? Uh, and it's like how do you find that balance? And yes, people can speculate, uh, but I would recommend having a position on how you speculate in the sense that, and I've said this before, you know, collect what you love, uh, because even if it goes to zero or it depreciates, you still love that card.
Mm.
Surely I've overpaid for some cards. Surely I've overpaid for many things in life. You know, I've bought art where the artist's career no longer exists. I've bought NFTs that or crypto that have dropped 90% in value. Um, I bought sneakers that became so illiquid that okay, I decided to give away to the homeless or decided to give away to friends and family. Um, but or even like speculating on streetwear, like I that never really got the margin that I wanted. I'll just wear it. Um, but when it comes to cards, like you have to have that same type of appreciation for the card. Otherwise, yeah, people will think the hobby died
Yeah.
because it's exiting and just taking the loss. That sucks.
Yeah.
Um, and in America, there are people who buy cars under LLCs, and that loss can be a write off.
Yeah.
But for a lot of collectors, they don't operate that way,
No.
and just like that's just pure pain. And if you're going to collect high end cards, I think I would almost look at it as a high end gamble if you're doing it for speculation.
Yeah. Do you how have you changed in the last year in terms of what you decide to go for? Have you become this is the wrong word, but it's the sentiment. Have you become fussier? And that is the wrong word. More selective, more considered.
Extremely, extremely selective, especially the cost of singles today, especially the cost of wax today, aka boxes and
Yeah.
packs. Um, I wouldn't be able to just oh, I love all these cards. I'm just gonna add to cart or claim, and
Mm.
keep on moving. Um, Now it's a question of, hey, do I acquire something that I think is will be tradable in the future, or do I acquire something that is for my PC? And do I want to overpay here, or do I want to wait? I think it's become almost a game, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I collect one of the most popular characters in Marvel. So for me, it's like I'll never be able to be a completionist, not in the sense of
Mm.
like yourself or other character collectors that we great character collectors that we know.
Oh, I'm starting to step off the completionist trail because it's gotten a bit too up there for me now.
I mean, in Character Club, we know so many great character collectors, and like, I think I was just talking with Pancake yesterday, and Pancake told me he owns this absurd percentage of Captain America cards that have ever been printed,
Yes.
and I was like, "You are mad.
And
You're a
that's a
meanie."
lot. That's up there with Spidey.
Oh yeah. I would say it's like tier 1.5, and if that's in terms of pricing and collectability.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not judging Captain America as a character.
yeah.
Uh,
We're talking about Vulcan here when he becomes captain, yeah.
yeah, Falcon is Cap.
We love you,
But
Pancake. We really do.
but what is my point here? I could never be a completionist of Spider-Man at that level.
Mm,
Maybe up to now, I have a good percentage of cards printed, but for me, I strictly collect high end. Also,
yeah.
in a one bedroom apartment. What you're looking at is my living room right now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
As you can see, there's probably not a lot of space to store cards.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so for me, it's I've become very selective, and I like to use the word tasteful and the cards and compositions that I am acquiring. For me, the art absolutely matters,
Yeah.
and if it's even if it's reused comic art, which I'm totally fine with. I think that's an I actually love that. Some people are like, oh yeah, I only want to collect original art. I'm like, well, there's more to Marvel Crisis than that. Like I love anything with a comic cover art or something that was from inside a book. Um, what was my point there? But yeah, like for me, I have to love the image.
Mm.
Now that if I don't love the image, like I might pass on it. I might pass on it, or I might collect a lower variant of it in terms of
Yeah.
variant, and not have to go after, you know, the out of 25s, the out of 10s, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm. Yeah. No, I had that with Spidey Metal. I wasn't massively enamored with either Black Cat image on that set. In fact, for me, the best Black Cat card in that set is the retro animated one.
And I disagree with you, and obviously you're the expert, but I actually love
Hmm.
the Black Cat High series.
The Amazing Spider-Man 194 image.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that art.
Yeah. I think I've just sat with it for too long and I've seen it on so many other cards that it's kind of like, oh, give it a rest. There's her second, but in the issue 220, whatever it is, there's a cover appearance where it's a strong image. They could have
And I
gotten
think
away
that's
with that,
perfect. I think,
So
and Upper Deck, if you're listening, I think the amount of times you use an image
yes,
definitely affects the collector,
yeah, yeah,
right?
it definitely does. Um, so for me, it's an easier thing to say, okay, I'm not going to bust my balls going after the. I mean, I've not gone after the greens for that set because they're simply above my. I have a value threshold. I won't pay over a certain amount. So recently there was a black cat, and I'm mad about printing plates, as you know. Um, First black cat printing plate for Masterpieces 22 dropped, and it was
Mhm.
at 700. Now it was fairly early on, and I've seen others since, and it is a step up this year, with
Yeah.
those values for printing plates. And I'm thinking, okay, well, yes, I'd like it, and at the time, I could afford it. This is only about 3, 4 weeks back. I could have afforded it, but I wouldn't have been able to afford things that I've acquired since. And also, I was like, that's probably almost I mean, it would have been one of the most expensive single items I'd have ever purchased, and I was like, I just can't do it. At 700, I'm out. It's a wonderful play, but it kind of, when I think about the things, in my real life, because I'm not a high earner, that I could do with that money instead, I'm like, I'm okay, and I know where that plate went, and I'm very happy, that the person who got it has got it.
Yeah.
Um, so it's in a good home. And the thing is, I know where it is. I know it's being looked after, and I'm okay with that. I don't have to own every single plate.
I'll tell you something funny. So you were saying earlier, like, hey, how has the hobby changed for you since?
Mm,
I think the more and more people realize that I collect Spider-Man and Miles Morales. I also collect a slew of other characters, but obviously can't be a completionist or
yeah.
collect high end for everyone. Um, but for those two characters, I've seen people unfortunately come to me and ask for prices that are multiples of what it's worth on the market value. And I think that comes with as the hobby grows, right?
Yeah.
Like at this point, people probably think that, oh, Steve Aoki's the premier Wolverine collector. So if I have a high-end Wolverine card, I'm just gonna move it to him. Um, and then the same way they probably think, oh, there's multiple high-end Spider-Man collectors. There's my exit liquidity if I pull something big. But every Spider-Man collector collects different things.
Yeah.
And it's kind of gross that you look at someone as exit liquidity,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
Because something that's not talked about enough collecting high end is really about your network.
Yes.
It's about your network of friends. It's how you've treated people in the past. Um, it's whether you want to maintain that relationship. A lot of the cards that I've obtained, I wouldn't be able to do so without developing that bond or having that pre-existing connection
Yeah.
with the other collector. And it's not about paying the most. Like believe me, I offer top value for the cards that I'm trading for. But it's also, hey, has that other collector helped me in the past? Have I had a lot of transactions with them in the past? Do they come to me to place their cards? Like, do I want to cash them out here? Right?
Hmm.
Um, am I grateful that they're even offering this to me? Yes. You know, uh, I have cards of characters that are very, very high end. And I have friends that I've literally said, hey, if I ever move this card, I will offer to you first.
Mm.
You know, because that's it, at the end of it, I'm a collector and I want to respect and appreciate other collectors.
Yeah.
But it feels like the hobby has changed to the point where, like, oh, I'm gonna, acquire this card so I can ask for this multiple later on, or this is percentage more over on from this collector, from that collector. And it's like, yeah, you can do it that way, but then I remember,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
like, notes will be taken.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. No, it's interesting that I've always been a believer that, and I've said this to people who've come into the group new and said, okay, how do I, some people have asked, how can I trust to sell on Facebook and to do this and to do this transaction? It's like, well, obviously, there's obvious ones like PayPal goods and services, and you can ask for vouchers and stuff, but I always say to people, it's about building that network. It's about building that kind of community of people that you know and people that you trust. And it's an interesting thing. In the last year, there have been some people that have left the hobby because they're just not happy with the changes in the hobby, and there have been some people that have stepped off of that trust circle, by choice or by necessity or whatever. They've moved out of that space. So I think it is very interesting how many personality changes there have been over the last year. Um, and people have made choices. I think, people have chosen to go in different directions with their collections. Um, what I find is interesting is, and we did have this to touch on. What do you think? Because content. So let me rewind. When I started this podcast with Norin back in 2000 and fuck, what year are we in? 2009. So which is 4 years, over 4 years old now. No
Wait,
one was really making.
2019?
What's that? Sorry.
You said 2009. Did you mean 2019?
I did. Thank you. I've lost a
Okay.
decade somewhere.
I
It's
was like,
been that
oh, you
kind of
had.
year. It's been that kind of year. I've lost a decade.
Okay.
um,
Oh, okay.
so there wasn't anyone else out there making talking about Marvel cards, really. I mean, there were groups, there were communities. There wasn't anything out there. Fast forward, there's loads of people doing it. Okay, so what would you say the biggest? And obviously, that there was a period where a lot of people who created content who weren't from the Marvel scene started talking about Marvel cards, and that's slightly different. What would you say that the impact has been of? I'm hesitant to use the word influencer, even though that's what there's a perception that some of them do. Um, I've always found it an odd word, and someone's called me it recently, and I'm like, really? Am I? I don't know. But anyway, what do you think the impact of that content creation has been on existing and also new people coming into the hobby?
So this is probably why I told you that I didn't want my face on the YouTube or recorded video.
Okay.
Because I think you may have seen in the last 2 minutes my face like completely warp and drop. Because talking about this gets me so emotional, right? first of all, you were saying that like the change in behavior of the hobby, and people who that fell out of circles of trust, and it's just like there are so many people in the hobby that I've trusted that have burned me. Um, and it's really unfortunate to see, right? Because people can say a lot of things about me, and a lot of them may be valid. I'm not. I'm a person that once you're in my inner circle, I treat you like your blood.
Mm-hmm.
But I am now a very cautious and wary person, and it's almost PTSD, right? And I think it's because I have been burned by people who I consider friends. People I've had like phone calls with, people I've um, had meals with, people who I've uh, traded big cards to that I normally wouldn't. And similarly, they've helped me. But for whatever reason, for whatever uncommunicated reason, people change and you know make decisions that leave your circle for good. Um, I felt like that was therapy there. But we talked about that, and all I have to say about that, because I know you've been impacted, and I know this hobby has taken its toll on a lot of us that have been in here the last couple of years, is that thankfully there are still good people in the space, and it makes you want to value them and keep them in your circle even more. Which, as a segue, you're talking about influencers and content creators and content creation. I think it's almost become too clicky. Um, it's almost become collectors versus content creators, which is very odd to me, right? There should be that overlap, but people who have the podium now don't want to have the podium and debate. They don't want to deal with a civil conversation or facts or being corrected or uh, getting educated. I've only been in the hobby 4 or 5 years, and I am not an expert by any means. But you know, much like the reason why a celebrity was able to become the president of the United States in 2016, it's due to misinformation.
Mm.
And that is a huge problem in Marvel. And I think it's one of the reasons why, in my opinion, we're still maybe a decade plus away from seeing the space mature. Um, there's just so many opportunists, so many people who are, creating their own narrative, that they lose sight of the power of their words.
Mm.
Right? They lose
Yeah.
sight of the power of their actions, because so many people that are new to the space, and as the hobby grows and more people enter, they take what you say at face value.
Yeah.
So, hashtag with great power comes great responsibility. Um, the reason why we had a precious metal gems bubble was, one, there was a market maker, and two, a lot of misinformation. Right? Um, we saw this bubble with sketches at one point. We saw this bubble with sketchographs. We saw this bubble with um, what was a interesting one with exquisite cards for Marvel
Mm-hmm.
Jet, with holograms right now for Marvel Beginnings. Why do these bubbles exist? And I would argue that Marvel Masterpieces 22 right now is in a bubble. And we can talk about price relativity and how to think about that later in this conversation. But um, if you do your own research, these people who are pushing this narrative, they're probably wrong more times than they're right. And it's when people do content on like, hey, this sold for this much, exclamation point, rocket, rocket, rocket. Like, okay, it sold for that much, but did it get paid? How much did the next one sell for? Are you highlighting the minus 80% cliffs?
Mm. Was it
Or
an
are
exception?
you highlighting
Yeah.
that one big sale
Mm.
and generating euphoria and excitement, and then people get wrecked? And I'm not saying these content creators or influencers have an ulterior motive. Some may, and it's not for me to prove. Um, but I think they don't understand the power of their words. Um, and that's why for me, when it comes to anything, when again, whether you're buying contemporary art at a gallery or auction house, whether you're paying resale for a sneaker,
Yeah,
oh, when you're buying a used car, um, do your own research,
yeah.
because if you're not seeing the context of these prices or like the facts, um, you're it's on you,
Mm,
right? Like
mm.
it's one, yeah, you can blame the content creator and influencer, but at some point the buyer or the collector needs to take responsibility for their
Oh,
actions.
absolutely. Yeah. The personal responsibility and taking account of that is has been lacking in a number of areas. I think over the past couple of years, especially for actions on social media. But that's almost an entirely different conversation because, good Lord, people lose their shit. Um, no, I just want to come back to that masterpieces bubble thing.
Mm,
I was I say I was around. I was collecting in 2016 when Masterpieces
lucky you.
came back, and I got three boxes. I got three boxes from Ed Webb, um, and I stretched to buy those boxes um, because my daughter wasn't yet 1 year old, and we needed the cash. So I think I sold quite a lot of comics actually to afford them. And if I told you how much they were now, it's less than the price collectively of one box of Masterpieces 22 at release point in the market we're in. So it's weird how 7 years changes. Um, and I was utterly green about that set when it came out. Now, to a degree, a lot of people were because we'd never seen anything like it. We'd never seen that set format before. We didn't
Mm,
know what was going to go on, what was going to go on, how it was going to play out. I remember getting a signed card, with the certificate of authenticity. And I remember trading it. And at the time, I traded that and other things, and I got stuff that I, I'm happy I own. So I have no regrets about what I did and didn't do with that initial three boxes. But I was ready for 2018 when it came out. And at that point, I'd not long set up MCCW and MMC. And the interesting thing with 2018 and with 2020 and with 2022, I've perceived there is always a little bit of a bubble around the release. But
mhm.
this year feels amplified for some reason. And maybe it's because the price point that's available to people at release is higher. So it's kind of taken it to the next level. But again, I think this comes down to that there's one thing that education won't give you and doing your own research won't give you. It's the experience. Because
Mhm.
knowledge, what's the saying? Knowledge plus experience equals wisdom. Okay. So I know now, I mean, I've done some trades and I've got, a decent start on masterpieces. That's my masterpieces 2022 start. That's maybe, a fifth of what I'll end up with. Um, and I'm very happy with that start. But I'm happy to play the long game because I'm not going for that limited stuff. I'm not going for the higher end thing. So there comes a point where with this, it's about, okay, who do you turn to talk about that from an experience point of view? Where do you go and, what advice do you seek? And I think,
So one, I think the art for Marvel Masterpieces 22 is phenomenal.
yes,
Uh,
absolutely.
it's stunning. Um, the set is diluted, and I don't think you can argue that, right? The print run of the boxes has expanded. There's
Mm,
more parallels.
yes.
Um, Upper Deck went out of their way to find another 1 through 90 parallel, which is the preserved embers. There's just more ways to collect the set now.
And
And
was it Emerald one of 25? Is that what they're
yes,
called? Emeralds? Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and I mean, yes, there's new parallels, and you know, because of the increased print run. There's probably more Mirages now. They've made Tier 4 Gold 6 easier to get.
Mm.
So that's a higher print run.
There's about
So
5 times more of those this one.
any way you slice the cake, the set is diluted compared to previous sets. That's not a bad thing, not by any means. Um, but I've actually had arguments with like good friends and shop owners. Shout out to NT Keith. That the secondary singles for Marvel Masterpieces 22 doesn't make sense right now, and in my opinion, it's not sustainable. And here's why. And I could completely be wrong here.
Hmm.
And for the sake of the people who have bought in early, man, I hope I'm wrong. But here's the thing: if Marvel Masterpieces 16, 18, and 20 have already released, and there's precedent for cards with the similar rarities, right? For Silver Spectrum autos, for What If autos, for printing plates. If there is a precedent for these prices, and Marvel 2022 prices are in multiples of that, literally, like in some cases, more than 2x. Um, what happens first?
Mm.
The previous sets catch up, or does Marvel 2022 regress to the means? Um, in my opinion, it's much more likely that 2022 regresses to the means because it's not going to be the last Marvel Masterpieces set.
No.
We'll see another one in 1 or 2 years. We'll see other sets that are in demand. And there's actually a lot of product that UD is putting out that I am excited for, even on the high end spectrum, and which I can't talk about here, but UD has dropped their breadcrumbs. And what's my point here? So like for something to hold its value and appreciate, it needs a strong collector base, right? Um, there's a reason why precious metal gems, even though it has crashed from the euphoria highs, is still much higher than where it was years ago. We're talking about exponentially higher.
Yes.
The reason why there is there's an actual collector base.
Mm.
Either you hate the way these collectors talk about the cards or not, there's an actual collector base. And for Marvel Masterpieces 16, 18, and 20, I think 16 and 18 have a collector base. 16 especially because of the bridge between 92 and 16.
Yes.
And the fact is that set has been around the longest for the modern Marvel Masterpiece. So there's an actual genuine collector base there.
Mm.
And when I mean genuine, I mean there are people to this day that are trying to complete that set.
Yes.
They're trying to like pick up singles and add to
I'm
their
still doing tier 4 purple.
Sure. And there's still cards I'm looking for.
Mm.
Like with the collection that I have, there's still cards I'm looking for. 18, I wasn't around. But I also know who the big players are in 18. And I know what they have and I know what they have accumulated. I'm still adding 18. Like I know other people are, but there isn't as much depth in the base as there is to 2016. I think that's a fair statement to say,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not a knock on the set at all.
Mm.
I think Simone is like effing incredible, and I've met the guy, and I think he's such a talented painter. But it's just a matter of fact that in the year's releases, that one isn't as collected as 2016.
No.
Maybe it will one day. Maybe that could completely change, right?
I have to say, I mean, even though I've completed my set
Yeah,
of 2018, I'm still buying 2018 because I'm really enjoying now picking up graded copies
yeah.
just to have good graded displayable copies of some of the artwork because it's just some of the cards I just can't get away from. I mean, my favorite Wolverine card that exists is in that set. I mean, both of them. And I'm not a massive Wolverine collector by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not really an X-Men guy.
I
But
love both examples, the base and the canvas. I think
yeah,
they're
no, exactly, both of them. And I have days when it's like having twins. One day you hate one of the little fuckers, and one day you love the other one. It changes. Um, but yeah, and I think 2020 will 2020
well.
is an
Let
odd
me, let me
one.
talk to you about 2020. 2020 is, in my opinion, when this started to change.
Mm,
Right, that's when you saw much more people enter the hobby.
yes,
Right, and um,
you had a big influx of people who didn't collect Marvel up until that point as well.
yep, more people that entered Marvel card collecting, more people who just started collecting Marvel
Hmm.
masterpieces, and the boxes were at an affordable price point. Okay, that's a key point here. And
I have to
because,
say though, I have to say one thing I didn't notice on that, and I want this kind of documented. I remember because we were doing this podcast at the time. I remember a massive amount of upset over the fact that they were the price that they were. So it's
mhm,
interesting. You reflect back and think, oh yeah, that was, but at the time it was a massive step up.
I think
Um,
I think for through the distributors, it was a massive step up. I think Upper Deck did an incredible job on EPAC
on EPAC, yes, EPAC was
making
bang
it
on.
accessible.
Yeah,
Yes, it was still a step up. But I think Upper Deck did an incredible job making it accessible. And I know if they're listening, they're going to be like, "Well, the hobby has to grow." Yes, but you can't get greedy.
mm,
We've seen this across all parts of the trading card hobby,
mm,
right? I'll give you examples. Like basketball prism today is priced so out of whack that cards have dropped 90%. Um, Pokemon prints so much that you're no longer seeing multiples on the wax and singles.
mm,
Magic the Gathering has now resorted to serial number cards to create this, this level of rarity in order to sell their product. Because now there's so many people who are just speculating. So like,
yeah,
but the prices of that product is not spiking tremendously either. Once you spike it to a point where it's it's hard to regain liquidity to buy more, when you are unable to use the hobby to sustain the hobby, you're killing the golden goose.
yeah,
And Upper Deck, if you're listening, that's my thought process about this. Um, you can't control what the distributors do. I know a lot of collectors are like, well, you shouldn't allow these distributors are going to take advantage of capitalism. That's just the way it is. It's it's the people who are opening this product at these price points. Myself included, I'm guilty. I've opened like 4 boxes, and also people buying into breaks.
yeah,
Like people are sustaining those price points. If I'm one of the big three online retailers, I'm like, why would I drop the price if people are still
mm,
buying at like 3x what it was?
yeah,
What do I care about you if people are buying? I think
yeah,
that's unfortunately the reality of the space. Now, to the core of this, 2020 is when this all changed, but at the same time, prices were still affordable. So you have people who are actively trying to put it together sets of 2020. But we're also going to see many years before that come into fruition where we know what the collector base is for 2020. I don't think that collector base is there right now.
no,
And I love David Palumbo. I could speak, for hours about how generous that man is and uh, what he has done for the hobby and
yeah,
how thoughtful he is in his approach.
beautiful human being.
Yeah, like I think he's probably one of the more abstract um, Marvel painters, and I think that may not be received well by traditional comic guys. Like people who like collect Jusco probably can't get into Palumbo's work because it's
Mm.
different line work.
But that's what I love about masterpieces. It
Absolutely,
it resets the visual narrative each set. And if it
yeah,
didn't do that, I think it would be doing a disservice to the masterpieces brand, in my opinion.
yes, and the same way that Dan right now, like if let's say you were into painterly work, and I mean in the sense of brushstrokes,
Mm,
like Dan may not be for you.
mm.
But if you're into color, like Dan might be
And
one of the
the light on them. I mean,
light and color. He's stunning.
I mean,
So
he's waxed lyrical before. It's on record. You can go Google it and find it about how much he respects and reveres the Hildebrand approach. and you can see that influence. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
it's
I
just the
mean,
lighting, just the way that it's done on the
stunning.
pieces. It's just
Yeah.
yeah, it's gobsmacking.
Um, but each artist has their own strengths and weaknesses, right?
Yes,
And because they have their own strengths and weaknesses, they have their own collector bases.
yeah.
If you notice when the Greg challenge has become incredibly popular, where people are posting
Oh,
a
2016, 2018, 2020, 2022. Yeah.
character from all 4 years,
Yeah.
and they rank them. I effing hate that, man. Like,
I mean, I like the Greg challenge.
I love the
I
challenge.
don't know. It's the response to it that,
I love seeing all 4 years
yes.
together, right? But then like ranking them publicly and treating it as like this is what I think, so this is the truth. Like, no, it's an opinion.
Mm,
Let's make it very clear. This is an opinion, and this is your
mhm,
opinion. That's perfectly fine.
mhm.
And then you see people saying comments like, "Well, I can't believe they have this as the best," or "I can't believe they have this as the worst." I'm like, "Well, you can believe it because it's supposed to be an opinion."
Yeah.
Um, so I personally have not commented anywhere, with my rankings and
Mm,
thought process. I think instead of putting your ranking, maybe just put what your favorite is. Don't insult the
mm.
other artists, right? People are allowed to have favorites. I mean, regardless of
Well,
what
I've
people say.
just expressed what my favorite Wolverine was, but I'm not dissing the other Wolverines. It's just my favorite.
I mean, you can have several Chinese restaurants you like, but you probably have one that you like the most.
Yeah.
And people won't say it, but they don't love their kids equally.
I've only got the ones, so I avoid that problem.
But going back to 2022 and this whole collector base issue, wow. What is going to be the collector base here with the boxes at these prices? And when it comes to putting sets together, when it comes to collecting characters, like what is it going to look like? It might
Mm,
take a really long time for that to like formulate.
yeah.
Um, so my question is, if a printing plate from these previous sets, which has an actual collector base, which has comps and a market, that's solidified and will move in lockstep, right? One way, either it moves down or move up, but it will be gradual. Um, if that market already exists, how can you believe that the market as it is right now will sustain itself,
Mm,
right? If printing plates are 2-3x of what the other sets are, and you're telling me this is a steal, this is a great buy, this has nowhere to go but up.
yeah, yeah.
Like, where are you? How are you saying this? Or if like there's people who are like, oh, this set's going to change the game. Like the game has existed. It's not a new game. This is it's not a complete new set. It's literally the same sets with more parallels,
Yeah.
different art.
I think one of the interesting things is that there is an element of how people react to players and sports teams. And
Mm,
I'm not a psychologist by any stretch of the imagination, but I, for me, my of the masterpieces sets that have come out, the ones that are my favorites are the ones that I have the personal experience with that's been positive. So for 2007, that's when I got into Marvel cards
yeah.
in a big way. And I have that experience because it's the last set I was able to purchase in a retail store in the UK, and I fell in love with Marvel cards. 2018 masterpieces for me is that special thing because it was the first masterpieces set that came out since setting up the group. Simone came into the group, became a part of the community. We did content with him in the group. So I have that record, and I touched on it last week with Amanda. For me, there are sets that I will never let go because I lived and experienced them. So Masterpieces 2018, Marvel Annual 2018-19, because I have memories of making friends and trading that and having a good time with it. And so that's in, I can't separate that from what the cards are and what the experience of the cards are. So I'm that's complete subjectivity. So I think there will always, if we look 10 years down the line, there are people who are new to masterpieces now, or it's their first masterpieces release, who will probably always say, will be 2022 is my jam. It's my absolute, regardless of what masterpieces 2029 is like. Because of that subjective, you never forget your first. And, people always say you never forget your first. Realistically speaking, how good was your first?
Um, I think you're completely right here. It's about energy, right? It's something I talk about a lot with my inner circle and friends and family. There's energy in everything you do,
Hmm.
and it's whether you walk away from a person or experience with positive energy.
Yes.
Um, and that energy can always be transferred. Can always like you can always build on it, and but just as simply, one really negative experience can wash away all of that.
Hmm.
Um, I think for whatever the reason is, and I think there are reasons that can be pointed out. The hobby right now is not in a good place because there's so much negative energy.
Hmm.
Uh, and the positive energy that's trying to be in its place doesn't feel like it's, you know, it doesn't feel like it's a light that's going to all of the shadows. It feels like it's a spotlight and it's like, oh, okay, this is now there's light. Now it's positive. No, it's literally one beam when everyone else is going through a lot of negative energy in the hobby.
Mm.
And I think for this space to mature, I mean, just going back to national, I remember this high end collector came into me and was like, "Yeah, I was really into Marvel, but wow, like it's crazy how negative some of these people are." And I'm like, well, were they negative because they were telling the truth, or were they negative because they lost money? Like, what was the reason? And it's like, oh yeah, they were just saying like this car's not worth that much. And I was like, did it end up being worth that much? And they're like, oh, well, again, that it's not that there was like debate and facts and criticism doesn't necessarily mean it's an argument or like it's hostile,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Uh, my mother's an immigrant. My mother didn't grow up here. She didn't have higher education. Um, we argue a lot because I grew up in America and she grew up in Asia. And she'll say some statements that are completely off basis, oftentimes political or racial. And she'll be like, "Well, no, that's just the way you see it." And I'm like, "Hey, um, what color is this piece of paper?" And it's a white piece of paper. And she'll be like, "It's white." I was like, "Cool. I would never tell you that this piece of paper is green and try to convince you that."
Hmm.
Right? Like
Mm.
that's not an opinion anymore. Like there are things that are factual and uh existing, and it's like, are you arguing about what the color is, or are you trying to force people to think the same way as you? And I think that's where the hobby is right now. Um, and I know you and I have talked offline about this. And you know, without going to specifics, I think toxic positivity is bad for the hobby. There needs to be room for debate.
Yeah.
There needs to be a little room for criticism. And I don't think it should ever get personal in a hobby, but to like add a counterpoint so that not one narrative, which might have an ulterior reason to dominate, is very crucial. But I think that's what you're seeing in the hobby right now, and I'm very curious where it goes from here.
Mm.
When I come back next year on your podcast, we'll see the hobby in a different space. Um, But right now, it's like I went into this Marvel Masterpieces 22 set thinking this might be it for me. I might I might draw a line at clicking here, and I know a lot of people who have thought this way,
Yeah.
just because of a myriad of reasons, right? Pricing, collectability, people who are currently dominating the narrative. People are fed up,
Yeah.
and I whether that's correct or not, it's not for me to say.
Hmm.
But I think for the space to grow for everyone, like there needs to be a breathing room for conversation and criticism.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's just my thoughts. And
And that's one of the challenges because it's not just Marvel cards. You get this in virtually everything. And I see it happen on Facebook all the time, even in fairly reason level-headed groups and forums. Because Facebook, you see someone say something, and it's like, and immediately the response comes back rather than being a debating one with reason and facts, and it becomes a personal thing almost immediately on the response, even if these people have never interacted before. And and I think uh, it's a shame, but I think, and I've spoken about this on this podcast before. I think that's a very specific kind of unfortunate thing that just happens by virtue of the platform a lot at the moment. I mean, I don't engage on Twitter anymore simply because that went that way a while ago. I think it's very difficult now to have and it's a shame. And I say this as someone who set up two groups on Facebook, but I think it's very difficult now to have a balanced conversation on Facebook. Um, Simply because the knee-jerk reaction for a lot of people is one of misreading what's been said, or simply, well, I don't think that, so my opinion's the factual one. And people come back on that a lot.
so I think the difference between the conversations that happen on Facebook and let's say Instagram
Mm,
is moderation, and I'm saying in terms of moderators and admin, um, might take too much liberties. Meanwhile, in Instagram, people will eventually check people, if that makes sense.
yeah.
It's something that is completely out of line. Like other people will come in and because it's Instagram, right? There's no one that can ban you or besides
Mm.
unless you.
Well, apart from the OP.
But it can be like, yo, that's not true, and um, and if it gets personal, other people are like, why are you acting like this?
Mm,
While on Facebook, there's I hate to say it, borderline censorship, and it's an issue where instead of having you know conversation and room to breathe, you have people misinterpreting things. You have because it's text, right? It's you're not seeing
yeah.
other people's, and I'm gonna be frank. It seems to me Marvel card collectors are not the best communicators in the world for whatever reason. It's just there's not a lot of elegance to their prose. Um,
I was going to say nuance when you when you came out with that word, so I think we're thinking along the same lines there. Yeah.
um, but that often involves a moderator stepping in and be like, okay, we're just shutting this down because we don't want any conflict, period. I think that's also unhealthy. Like there needs to be that like that moderator might need to come in and be like, hey, let's not get personal.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm here, but continue
Yeah.
on. Um, and you see it these days. You see it on YouTube. You see it on Discord. It's like, well, if you don't like this, you can leave. Like or on whatnot, boot you out of the
Mm.
shit. Like, why are you talking about this? You're bringing negativity. Boom. Yeah.
Oh, do they do that right? I've no experience on whatnot. So yeah.
Like, if someone's questioning the value of
Mm,
these hits, it's like, well, I don't. You're here to like mess up my feed. You're a troll. Boom.
okay.
Right. In Discord, it's like I get it. You spend your time to manage and create that community. You don't want to deal with the headache. Fine, but that becomes an echo chamber.
Mm,
And unfortunately, Marvel cards hasn't gotten to a place where people can have these like healthy conversations.
mm,
Um, in I hate to say it, the real world, there's a lot of like panels and conventions and
Yeah.
where people can offer differing views. You can have
Mm.
like CEOs from different companies like have playful banter, right? Without crossing the line, without
Yeah.
getting personal.
Without it being like a warm up at a boxing match where they're reaching over the table to bash each other.
Yeah. Um, Meanwhile, in Marvel cards, it's like you disagreed with me, then why are you fighting with me?
Mm. Yeah. I mean, listen, I'll hold my hand up and say that, obviously from the prism of the groups that I created, I didn't create them to be somewhere that had conflict within them. Whether I like it or not, they're bigger than me or my kind of initial goals with them now, whatever they were. I didn't beyond setting up a space where I wanted people to positively talk about the cards and trade cross border because that's what I was lacking. So from a purely selfish group point of view, I set up a group where people had to trade cross border. So that's the fact of it. Um, but there are rules to it, and I always say that for me, I always think of it like the Klingon way. When
Trekkie.
people, what's that?
I am not a Trekkie at all.
No, 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 no. Well, it will make sense in a moment. Where Klingons, there's especially Star Trek: The Next Generation had this, where Klingons act with honor.
Okay.
Okay. And they conduct themselves with honor. I'm trying to think of a typical of me to choose the one cultural reference you don't have. It's like, "Arr!" So anyway, and that's always been my lens. Now, yes, granted, other people can take that lens and see a different thing through it. Um, but that's always been my goal, and I've always wanted to kind of reflect that on here. I won't um openly, diss and name other people, whereas I know in other content and in other groups, sometimes that happens. I just choose not to do that. I might allude to things, but I choose not to do it because at the end of the day, it's I'm doing this because I love cards and I love collecting and I love the relationships that you build and I love the network we've talked about and I love my experiences with collecting certain sets because they're completely intertwined with the relationships that I have. So, Fleer Ultra Spider-Man 2017, I we wouldn't be sitting here were it not for that set. Full stop. We wouldn't have the friendship that we have. And I can say the same about half a dozen other people in the hobby. Um, but it's difficult because you get to the point where, okay, at what point do I pull the plug on this because someone's being an arsehat? Because ultimately, one person becoming an arsehat leads to someone else thinking, "Oh yeah, I've got a green light to become an arsehat as well," and it does kind of spiral. Um, anyway, I didn't have a point or an end game to that. I was just kind of off the top of my head.
Yeah, I don't want this to get too negative. So, I
No,
mean, full circle and bring into context why this conversation even matters is that, like, even in high end collecting, um, critical thinking and room for other opinions is very helpful.
mm,
Facts and education is equally important.
yeah, yeah,
And I think that's the problem with the space today. Um, that not enough facts are present, not enough transparency
mm,
exists with. Um, I mean, even like, and there's multiple people to blame, right? Like even, and I love Upper Deck, but even Upper Deck has a problem here, right? Like for example, what's her name? I believe Jury Chinchilla, the artist,
oh yeah,
had
mm,
edge cards in Spider-Man Metal, and as far as she knows, they were approved. She's on the checklist, I believe, and none of them ever have surfaced. Not on physical, not on EPAC,
oh interesting,
and it's just like, well, were these pack inserted or not? I feel like the hobby itself doesn't operate with enough transparency,
mm,
and unfortunately, that allows bad players to operate in the space. Um, Like that's why you have aftermarket sketches. That's why you have like or aftermarket sketches that are masquerading as packable sketches. That's why you have you know, people selling blanks that they didn't submit, et cetera, et cetera. Reselling blanks, Jesus. Um, and all of this comes back to the lack of transparency in the hobby and the gatekeeping involved, which is hilarious because you and I were talking about gatekeeping offline just a couple of weeks ago. Which also comes back to another point. Like you and I have not always seen eye to eye. We've
No.
butted privately, publicly. Yet I'm still here on your podcast today because I know ultimately you're a great person and you are a major positive influence for this hobby. And you know, I hope you recognize that, and I hope you understand the power that you have to this hobby. I sometimes think you don't, and you know, I think that's a compliment.
Thank you.
You're a
Mm.
very important person to this hobby, but that also means you are just like anyone else are able to shape how this hobby grows. And I know you have your family. I know you have the podcast. I know you have cards. So like, you know, shaping the hobby might not be a priority for you, but you do have that power.
Mm.
And I'm not going to say it again, but you know, with great power comes
Power
great.
comes great responsibility. Well, it does. Thank you. No, I appreciate that. Someone once said something to me very, very early on in the days of the group, and I remember it, and I won't give the context. What did they say to me? And they said it kind of in jest. They said, lies, heavy is the head that wears the crown, I think it was what he said. And I never perceived it just because I was in charge of a group. So that's not giving myself delusions of grandeur, but it's always been, it was never my intention to be that voice. So the fact that people find that, my intention was always just to spread awareness of the cards and spread different stories about the hobby and how people are enjoying the hobby and about people who are interacting in the hobby, um, in the hope that it will bring more people into the hobby. So, if I can do that good, then I can sleep well. You're doing something right when people are throwing rocks at you.
I don't know about that.
Fair enough. Well, I,
People stoned.
yeah, all right, yeah, people used to get stoned. Um, very quickly, and then we'll wrap up. What have you? What's coming up that you know, having said that, Masterpieces 2022 might have been your off ramp. Is there anything coming up that does get your tail wagging that you are looking forward to, or that you think will be something that maybe might be, not asking you to speculate here, but maybe something that might not be blowing people's socks off now, but when it comes out, it could actually be.
There's two things. One is I don't know if a lot of people know, but Upper Deck brought Jean, Jean, I believe that's how it's spelled, from Arena Design in house.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So Arena Design was the originator of of NBA metal,
Yes,
um, and the original precious metal gems for basketball.
that's right. I've seen content where she's been interviewed.
Yeah, the original. You should try to get on the podcast. Actually,
No,
she's
I've been it's on my list. It's on my list.
all right. Get to it, Ian. But she also designed platinum portraits,
Hmm.
jambalaya, etc. She's in house now for Upper Deck, so I'm really excited to see what new inserts she designs for Upper Deck.
That's exciting.
She's also one of the most important people in the space and incredibly talented.
Yes.
Uh, I believe her husband passed away recently, so R.I.P. Who
Oh,
one half of Arena Design,
yeah.
but she's in house now, and super excited for that. Two, all right, I hate to hype up product, but I'm super excited for Marvel Platinum. Um, it looks like it's going to be like a 200 card set, if I'm remembering the sell sheet correctly, with the low series being recycled comic art. But I believe Upper Deck has listened to the collectors here, and I believe the high series is all original art.
Here we go. I've got the sell sheet here. I'm just going to pull it up.
Yeah. And full disclaimer, I have zero investment in Upper Deck. I have zero Marvel Platinum cards or cases on pre-order. But I think that is going to be an interesting set for the.
Mm,
And from if I remember correctly, I believe it might be a Chromium set.
yeah, I'm just reading it now. Well, it doesn't say what the base set is, but it says dazzling array of numbered parallels on chromium stock.
Okay,
Um,
I believe the low series is recycled art. I don't quote me, and definitely fact check, do your own research. And then
yeah,
I believe high series is original art. Um,
it doesn't
and
say which is which on here, but it does say there's 100 cards of original art, 100 cards of classic art from 1960s Marvel Comics to the present day.
go.
Um, and
So
then it
I
goes into talking about parallels up the
check
Swahili.
for a lot of different collectors, right? You have collectors who love parallels. You have collectors who love original art. You can't complain anymore. You can't be like, oh well,
Best
you
of
use
both worlds.
yes, it's the best of both worlds, and it's chromium. Um,
Yeah. And it's got Bill Sienkiewicz, Ron Lim, and Mike Allred named as the original artists.
well, I
There's
mean,
three of them. I mean,
and
what's not to like?
I think there's also other artists that people will be pleasantly surprised with.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it's a great set, and I think currently right now it's even at an overpriced price point. Just because it seems like it won't be a short print run for that set.
It's a big old set.
But I think that will be a fun set for the hobby, and hopefully a set where what beginning should have been, where a
Yeah.
lot of people, bases and bangers collectors, can rejoice, and hopefully it gets its time to breathe and shine.
Mm, mm. Well, I'm looking at this. There's so much to come, and I'm still having trouble catching up with everything that's been. To be fair, because ultimately we do live in a glorious age, in that there is a absolute raft of product coming out, left, right, and centre. So I'd rather have it that way than the other. So
It's it's not healthy. I mean, both like the delay and like you know shoving it down our throats is both is not healthy because sets don't get their proper time to shine,
yeah,
and,
they don't get the breathing room.
and like there's just not enough liquidity for all of this.
Mm,
Um, so it's a tough time for the hobby. Hopefully it corrects out through sometime in the next 5 years.
yeah,
I don't think this gets fixed within a year. It definitely doesn't. Like
no.
people forget that the pandemic was like minimum 2 years, and for some parts of the world, three. Um, and you know, for the world outside of the hobby to correct, it will have a drastic impact on how Marvel cards shape out. So a fun fact at the national. So I was in after the panel. Um, Amanda and I were invited to an Upper Deck Black Diamond event. Black Diamond retailer events. I believe that's Diamond dealer event.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah.
It's meant for their diamond dealers and VIP. Uh, Fabulous event. Won't get into the details because it's not about showing off here. But what was my point? It was incredible to see the enthusiasm from Marvel. Um, it was super interesting to find that the biggest Black Diamond collection that I've witnessed is based in China. They don't have Instagram.
Interesting.
They don't have Instagram. They're not on Facebook. They're not on any social media. They showed me all the pictures of the collector. That
Wow.
whole collection, and they have borderline a master set of Black Diamond,
What Marvel Black Diamond? Yeah.
all the Black Diamond. I'm talking about like exquisite autos. I'm talking about
Yeah.
23s, all the Infinity Stones, the biggest Black Diamond collection I've seen to date.
Wow.
Whether whether is actually the biggest collection, I don't know because um I haven't seen bigger, but maybe it exists. But the biggest witnessed is that one, and I was like, "What is this?" And then the person showed me that this collector has like man caves. I'm talking about like rooms of like Marvel and Star Wars and all of this other collector's goodness. But they collect cards and it's just vaulted, right? Similar to like Alan with Flair Ultra X-Men,
Yeah.
similar to uh how I look at my Marvel masterpieces, like and other collectors. There's Stephen Frank with his Flair Ultra Spider-Man. Some of these collections just probably wouldn't move unless you make a life-changing offer.
Mm.
And the collection was just stunning to see, and it's in a part of the world that has been closed off to the public because of the pandemic and
Yeah.
exists. No one on Facebook knows. And I was just like, wow, uh, that is fascinating to me, and like I need to explore the world. Like I recently acquired a massive card, and it came from Japan, and
Interesting.
I'll show you offline after this.
Yeah.
It knocked your socks off. But this card came from Japan from a collector who collects sports, and we were able to come to a deal with sports cards, a mix of sports and Marvel. Uh,
Nice.
and I was like, "How did you acquire this card? Did you open this?" And he was like, "No, got it off another Japanese collector." And I'm like, "Where are these collectors?"
Yeah. No, I've acquired some good Black Diamond stuff from Japan.
Yeah, and it's
Very,
just like
very good stuff. So
so interesting that like this hobby is global.
yeah, absolutely.
You can't really corral it, right? Um, we're not like Genghis Khan freaking bring all the Mongolians together. Like there's one person who can do all that.
I've never heard anyone reference Genghis Khan on this podcast before. Fantastic.
But one person who can bring this hobby together
Mm.
requires friendships, partnerships,
Yeah.
a think tank, and I would really want to see this hobby grow in the right direction.
Mm. Mm.
Uh, because if it doesn't, like, it's gonna be a lot of pain. It's gonna be like, why did I spend money on this? Like, oh, what is this brand doing? What is this person doing? Like, it
Mm.
sucks, and I don't want to see this become that. I want
Mm.
this to be. I want to see more Spider-Man collectors the same way I want to see more Duke collectors, right?
Hyper.
Yeah. Meanwhile, in Pokemon, you see that, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
there's Charizard collectors, and then there's also people who just strictly collect Leaf Pokemon.
Yeah.
In Magic cards, like, oh, I only collect blue cards, or I personally collect Japanese foil lands. That's what I collect in Marvel. I mean, sorry,
Okay.
that's what I. So each people can collect in their own way, and they
Mm.
don't have to be looked at as, oh, I'm the best at this, or I'm the top, or I'm the king. No, it's just like I participate in the hobby, and I love this stuff. I recently saw that video of Aoki being proclaimed as the biggest Wolverine collector in the world, and I'm sorry, Aoki, you're not. I know a bigger Wolverine collector. My Wolverine collection might be bigger, but it's just like that's such a crazy thing to say. If you
Mm.
and I love Steve Aoki. I think he's a super fun DJ, and I think he's great for the hobby. But it's
Oh,
like
he's a DJ. I have no idea what he does. Honestly, I've noticed just so not on my radar at all.
I think he's awesome, and I've worked with him professionally through my company. Like we've spoken with his team, um, but at the end of the day, it's like for this space to grow in the space. I mean, the Marvel trading card hobby. There needs to be transparency, honesty, and just people who are genuine.
Mm. Mm.
And like that transparency, like it's so much effort to flush it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Eugene, not that you're performing monkey of any kind, but do you remember how I sign off the episodes?
No, I'm not doing it, man. I
You're
can't. I
not.
can't.
I knew you weren't going to do it. I knew you weren't going to do it.
It is. I fumbled it last time. Not doing it again.
That's quite all right.
I want to thank you for bringing me on again.
Thank you
I
for
don't.
coming.
I don't share my voice on the hobby in too many public places, but this is a place I feel safe, and I truly respect the work that you do and how you've carried on the podcast, uh, even solo. And I look forward to the next time I'm on here, hopefully next year, around the same time. And I truly, truly love Marvel cards. And I hope the space is in a better place this time next year.
Eugene, thank you very much. I appreciate you making the time. Thank you, and I've loved this conversation. So thank you. Everyone else, enjoy collecting.
Oh, that's what it is?
That's what it is. Yeah. Thanks for listening to the Marvel Card Collectors Podcast. Tasting notes and visuals for each episode can be found on our Facebook page. We're on most social media at the MCC Pod, and you can also watch the video of each episode recording on our YouTube channel. Leave us a voicemail via our home on anchor.fm/MCCP. We're also on iTunes, Spotify, and all major podcast platforms. Please take a second to subscribe, like, and review our show wherever you find us. Our Facebook community is at MCCW Marvel Card Collectors Worldwide and MMC Marvel Masterpieces Collectors. The great music we use on our audio version is called Rocket Power by Kevin MacLeod. Thanks to the collectors, artists and creators who support the Marvel Cards Fan Collective. We'll see you next time, and remember, it's a small hobby but a fun one. Make mine Marvel and enjoy collecting.